tonight, a very rare live appearance on Stephanie the Story and our featured author for this month, which is, oh my God, I'm so excited.
I know.
Jennifer Robson, whose new book, Coronation Year, was it April 4th? Is that right?
It came out April 4th. It's been, it's just coming up effectively a month today, I guess, right? Because everything comes out on a Tuesday.
That's crazy. You've been all over.
I have been all over. Yeah, I guess I started the day pretty early in Winnipeg, and before that I've been in Vancouver, and now I get to stop kind of getting on airplanes for a little bit, and we'll be doing, more just Toronto-based stuff for the next while. There's some fun media appearances because of a certain occasion a few people might have heard about this coming up this Saturday, and and the timing it's one of these things, you ladies know we're all in publishing. The dates for books typically are set pretty far in advance, and so not only was the publication date of April 4th, 2023 set, I think probably maybe it was about a year ago. At one point it had been January, and then they moved it to April, which works well in for a number of reasons, not least because Prince Harry's memoir came out in January, and I think kind of, if you're talking royals, that was 99.99% of the airspace devoted to royals. But it had been set long before Her Majesty passed away. So, I remember, my first reaction, obviously, when she died was I couldn't even believe it. Logic tells you that somebody who is, really getting on there and has led a long and very complete and happy life, it's not unexpected or especially tragic in the grand scheme of things. But still, I think we are all, no matter what people might think of the idea of a constitutional monarchy, I think most people were pretty taken aback, and I certainly found it hard to absorb the news.
Well, I think for a lot of us, she was the queen our entire life. So we sort of, I mean, to us, she was just always going to be the queen. We just never thought she'd pass away.
Yeah, you pretty much have to be in your late 70s or 80s to be able to remember with any clarity a time before, the queen, and so it was really. I was really taken aback, and then I remember as the dust settled, and I had been contracted months before to write a long article for the Globe and Mail about the Queen's significance, kind of in the historical record, and it was pretty much done. Although I dragged my feet a little bit on completely finishing it because I had wanted to incorporate kind of my thoughts and feelings when she did pass away. And I also was being a little superstitious. I didn't really want to have this thing done before she was gone. And then she was gone, and oh gosh, I've got to finish this thing. And going back and forth with my editors at the Globe. And then, and so once that had all settled and I the article and I could really sit and think, it dawned on me that, there's a chance that my book Coronation Year will come out in a coronation year, the first in 70 years. And that was, there was, until they confirmed the date, actually, I wasn't sure. I thought there was every possibility they might really stretch it out, in that, it's not unusual to take place a year and a half after the monarch has acceded to the throne. Today, I don't think the practical considerations are, it's easy to pull these big events together quite a bit faster. So when they announced that it would be May 6th, I remember thinking, that's a month after the book comes out. That's pretty decent timing for me. So I'm very grateful to everyone at Buckingham Palace who seemed to have, sensed through the ether that they'd be doing a stupendously big favor. This is all about me. Yeah.
You text Charles and asked him if he could accommodate the date.
I know, yeah. It was so that was, and then just taking into account also, then there's a later realization. I thought I can nerd out in the biggest possible way about the history of coronations and so on, which really does interest me, and people may actually be somewhat interested in what I have to say, and that's been a lot of fun. Has been talking about the history, because you have a more or less unbroken millennium of history undergirding the ceremony that we're going to see next week, and I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you that Barb and I finished it within, 12 hours of each other, Barb, 8 hours of each other. Like, we were reading at the same time, and I was a little bit behind. And then Barb was like, because when we do this, like she's often ahead of me, and she'll message and she'll be like, I loved it, or wait till you get to page.
Yeah.
And so,
no.
Right. But she won't give me any spoilers, but I have to confess that I did something when I was reading it, and I warned her. So I'm reading it, and of course I've read everything that you've written, and and started with Somewhere in France, and you're an auto-buy, so I've read everything, and I'm like, there is so many little Easter eggs, or like you incorporated parts of different books into this, and I'm like, I think, and I thought, I bet you she mentions it in her author's note. Then I read the author's note, and I was only halfway through.
Yeah.
So I got to the end of the author's note, and I'm like, Barb, do not read the author's note before you finish.
I do warn people. I say there's some spoilers.
There is, right.
What happens?
I never read the author's note to the end for that exact reason. But I did get this giant notes. Do not read the author's note before you're done.
Yeah, and I tend to read them about halfway through, because at that point I'm into a lot of the meat of the book, and I get curious about things.
Yeah.
So then I tend to be like, "Ooh, I'm going to go read the author's note now." So then I messaged Barb, although I pretty much had it figured out anyway. Excuse me, but it was just the loveliest. Like, I think every time I read one of your books, I'm like, "Oh, that's my favorite." And then you come out with another one that I think I can't possibly like, because I did that, I know, with The Gown. And then you came out with Our Darkest Night. And so then with this one, I was like, is it going to live up? And I'm like, every time it's a
I'm
new
always
favorite.
nervous about that. I think, oh gosh, will people take this book into their hearts the way they have some of the other books? And what's gratifying is that at any, so say if I'm doing a big book signing at an event, I feel as if no two people, every one of my books gets cited to me as I'm signing books, and it's lovely because it shows. I hope that the books are sufficiently different that there's different elements that appeal to different people, but at the same time, there's people who've like yourself. I'm so grateful, that especially when fellow writers say they like the book. That's like pumping it up times 10, right? It's just so exciting. But what I hope is that people are finding something that, how should I put it, that there maybe is an overarching theme that appeals to people. I'm not always aware of it as I'm writing, but I think it does maybe come through, that I want the books to have a warmth to them. I want them to feel accessible. I don't think you should have to feel like you prepare, by getting your doctorate in history. Right. That the one thing that I shudder away from saying, oh, I'm an expert on anything, because I'm not, a nuclear physicist or anything. But the one thing that I've really lived and breathed in deeply is the history of this period, and it's my job to take that history and make it not palatable in the sense of easy, but palatable in the sense of, we all remember high school, and some of us were lucky to have incredible teachers. I certainly did. And some of us had the teachers who were just like feeding the history to you like it was just big chunks of bran, right? And you're kind of, it just very indigestible, very boring, did not feel like it had any relevance to like life generally. You know, and I feel as if the one job that I really have above and beyond entertaining people, that's why we pick up books, right? Is to be entertained and diverted and to learn new things. Not that the story should always be easy, but that they should carry us along. And my job is to take that and mix in just enough history that you feel maybe along the way without being conscious of it,
right?
You know, at the time, but that you end the book and you feel, I feel as if I have maybe a slightly like a greater understanding of what life was like in a particular time, or what people were going through, or just even the small. I just love capturing the small details of everyday life. You know, the way, and this isn't giving anything away significant about the plot, but there's a point at which a television set is purchased by Edie, my proprietor of the Blue Lion Hotel, at what she considers to be it's just a fearful expense. And she thinks it's very impractical, the idea of having a television. What really do they need a television for?
Right.
At this time, there's only one channel in the UK. It was the BBC. ITV, I think, it didn't launch until about 6 years later. So you turned it on, and that was it. It was, you know, it was the BBC, and you know, you would buy your Radio Times, and it would have the schedule, and there was, you know, the Women's Hour, full hour out of a day for women. I've met kind of them, and there's the Children's Hour and the news and so on, and that was that. And not a lot of the program was when you look at old Radio Times, it's not super enthralling, but you know, and just the way. You could just the approach, kind of this massive piece of, you know, hulking technology in your sitting room, and that it was so expensive, and was it really worth it? But then when the great day came, Coronation Day, and people are able to switch on their televisions and watch it live without having to be at the Abbey, without having to wait a few days for the newsreels. You know, you could always listen to it on the wireless, many people did, but to be able to see it was absolutely transporting for people. And so little, like, you know, in terms of the whole book, it's a tiny little piece, but, you know, just learning about that, for me, I found really interesting. And I remember thinking as I wrote the scene, I hope people get a sense of, you know, how what a big deal it was to be able to watch something like that live and feel you're participating, and the way people gathered. You know, very few people could afford a television, so you know, you would gather in a neighbor's house or in church halls. You know, my parents had watched the coronation from Vancouver, where they're growing up, and they had a memory of it being live, but it wasn't. The film had been flown across by the RCAF, landed in Halifax, and then was transmitted across the country. And they're living in Vancouver, meant they saw it, you know, quite a bit later in the day, but it was still, it felt like it was live. And to them, that connection of this is happening in London, so far away, and here we are. I just, things like that, I you know, it's not, in the grand scheme of things, terribly long ago. I mean, you know, I'm in my 50s. My parents were tweens when they watched it, you know, 70 years ago. It's not a big stretch, but so much has changed about our world in the last 70 years. To, you know, the fact that, you know, I have my phone here. So we're going to, oh, there's my doggy. There's my doggy, who is downstairs behind several doors. Otherwise, all you would hear right now is barking. The idea that, you know, millions of people will watch the coronation on devices like this would have been inconceivable. They really were inconceivable, except maybe a few people writing science fiction in 1953. The idea that something like this you could carry around.
So are you going to get up early and watch?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So is it like 3 in the morning when coverage starts in Toronto?
So yeah, probably between 3 and 4 in the morning. The coronation itself begins at 11 Greenwich time. So
American coverage starts at 5 a.m. Eastern time.
Yeah. So I will be up earlier with my friends. I have a lovely group of friends in the West End of Toronto, where I live, and for all the royal occasions. And it's not to say again that all of us are rah, royalists to the nth degree. For me, it's a kind of a tempered thing, in that I'm really fascinated in all this as a historian, and I have a lot of respect for the Queen, and may I also say for the King, who I think, and not to kind of go into the weeds over all of the kind of the current stuff that's going on, but I think if all of us, a lot of people tend to judge him according to things that happened decades ago, and can be somewhat selective in terms of judging him on, the moments of, say, dare I say, weakness or mistakes he's made, without ever being positive about the things he's got right. Which is not to say that he's perfect. Nobody is. But I'm always a little hesitant to judge a public figure more harshly than I think I myself ought to, would want to be judged, kind of on that general golden rule side of things. And people I know who've met him and have interacted with him speak of his great warmth, his absolute devotion and commitment to things that are really important, like the environment as a natural world, on which he was mocked mercilessly. I remember back in the 80s and 90s, everybody thought he was a complete flake because he was going on about the environment. So, all that said, it is a tempered interest that I have, because I'm also, also we don't need to get into kind of the weeds on this, but, I have some personal reservations about a system of an inherited monarchy country like Canada, for that to be part of our. I am the first person to jump into royal, and so for 12 years now, the same friends we met at my house. We were talking about it. So they were all J's and scones, the same scones, the recipes up on my, which are basically a big butter held together just by just a whisk of flour and sugar, very, very delicious. And so we'll watch and comment on it, and excited. I'm excited about the coronation.
Yeah.
We're having a little bit of technical issues. I'm just going to say, I think your phone might be too close to your computer.
Oh, let's try.
Better.
A little.
We should tell people. Someone just wrote. It just is Facebook user, and I'm sorry, but I'm guessing it's our friend Sue. But she said, I'm reading it right now, and I'm loving it.
Oh, fantastic!
And someone met the King in 1983. We should tell the people who haven't read it yet. This is not really about the coronation.
No.
It's about a hotel that's on the coronation route and the people that are living in it.
Yeah, and Barb, you had a really great comment about the theme. One of the themes that really resonated with you.
Yeah, it's about moving on and fresh beginnings and moving away from the past and healing. And I thought that was what really got to me. The coronation was such a small part of it. It was all about them moving on to. Sue met him in 83. I'm not reading it. That's what she wrote. And that's the part that really touched me, because all these people had tragic things happen to them.
And this period of, you can almost call it a small renaissance in England. So, and I see the books that I've read that are essentially about the royal.
We are having audio issues, Jen.
Let me just try. Let's turn off my. Take.
Someone said maybe cut out the video and just do the audio.
Are you doing it through Bluetooth?
She turned us off completely.
It's okay.
Oh. Well, she is trying to figure that out. We will tell you that the people have had very tragic stories. Since it is only, 8 years after the war, they suffered a great deal, and it's very hopeful. I thought the book is a very hopeful feel.
I agree. And the characters are so lovable.
Yes.
Like, you love them from the first page, and you never stop loving them.
No, and they're normal. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I shouldn't put it, but you know what? They're everyday people. You can imagine like knowing them and seeing them on the street, as opposed to sometimes you read a book and the person seems so, I don't know what, heroic or so bigger than life, and these people aren't. They're just people.
Yeah.
You happen to be sitting there. It's like you just like plopped yourself down into this one little hotel to find out what was going on for those 3 or 4 months. And that, like, next door there was another drama going, but you didn't see that one. You're just from here. I just really liked it. It gave me a very warm, fuzzy feeling. It
was a warm, fuzzy characters. I used to love everybody. How you making it, Jen?
Well, now your audio's off. You're on mute.
There we go.
Oh,
I will say, every time I try and use these are my daughters, and I borrow them. So I should just remind myself.
Oh, we lost you again.
Hit her mic again.
Lost your mic again.
Yep, there you are.
I'm going to take these and throw them out the window, and then we'll...
we filled the air with how great your book was.
My daughter, too. If she's talking to me and she has her Bluetooth earbuds, it's like all of a sudden I can't hear her, and I'm like, did your earbuds just kick in? And she's like, I'm so sorry.
Learn not to ever use these things, especially since it's nice and quiet here in the room. So so my books are royal adjacent, and it began with the gown. It was me trying to make the book as appealing as possible to people. And I was writing about, it was set in 1947. So it's only, 6 years previous, 6 and a bit. But it's the immediate post-war period. It's a time of absolute misery. Oh, there she is, looking so beautiful on her wedding day.
This is a keepsake that my mom had in an old cedar chest. My mom is 90 from the wedding. So when you talk about the gown, it's that gown.
Yeah. And you can see how white the gown was. It's yellowed very dramatically in the 75 years since, 76, I guess. So the Queen, Princess Elizabeth's wedding in 1947 was kind of it was like a beacon of hope for people in the UK, even people who themselves, again, were not, what you'd call diehard royalists and had some reservations about, the whole thing, found themselves being carried along in this tide of kind of goodwill and optimism and hope. And so, I set out to write a book that focused on the lives of ordinary people in that period, because I find and I've written, books that are set during World War I, during World War II, and those are fascinating to me to write for different reasons. What I love about books set in the post-war period is, again, what happens to people after the adrenaline kind of fueled work of winning the war is done, and you're picking up the pieces, and you're trying to put your life back together again, and around you everyone's trying to rebuild your society that you share. And 1947 was a really difficult time in many ways in Britain. Just economic collapse. The austerity was really profound in terms of the government measures that had to be brought in order so that there would be enough for everyone. And in some cases, it eclipsed the shortages that people had gone through during the war, right? Which led to people thinking, okay, so we won the war, not seeing a lot to show for it right now. This feels, this is pretty misery making. And so the gown, talking about the wedding gown, talking about the royal wedding was a way initially I was thinking, well, I have this nice candy coating of royals over what could otherwise be seen as a rather depressing story, although it's not. I mean, it and Coronation Year, I wrote in a spirit of hope. Not a kind of misguided Candide type of, all is for the best in this best of all possible worlds. It's that, it's remarkable what people can do when together we work, for the betterment of all. And, a case in point is how the world worked together to develop vaccines during COVID, which I think is kind of one of the remarkable stories of our age. But if we go back to 47, things were still, I leave my characters and I leave the world they're living in. And it's still, it was a pretty tough time. But 6 years goes by. It's 1953. The king has tragically passed away very young. He was only 56 years old. He looks much older in photographs, and you see how the war and the stress of that aged him profoundly. And on the throne is this beautiful young woman, only just 25 when she becomes queen. The same age that Elizabeth I was when she became queen. And so there are a lot of parallels being drawn. It's a new Elizabethan age. People were kind of unblushingly, in all seriousness, speculating on whether it would be a new Elizabethan age for England, for Britain, which is, of course, we can see in hindsight that absolutely did not happen, and that Britain, this was the twilight of its years as a kind of a really international power. And insofar as it has continued to maintain kind of an outsized presence on the world stage, some of that can be attributed to the longevity of the Queen and her presence as this very steadfast figure, enduring figure who had earned the respect of really most people she came into contact with. That aside, we hit 1953. Things are getting better all around. It's not perfect. I hope I demonstrate in the book that things were far from perfect, certainly in terms of, and I wanted to highlight the continuing racism and anti-Semitism that you see absolutely still afflicts British society, but was very present then as well. But generally, there was this feeling of real hope and optimism that carried people along, and life was actually getting better. Again, the historian in me always wants to insert brackets saying, broadly speaking, for most, not all people, right? I never want to speak in indefinites or absolutes, but it was a really hopeful time, and the coronation seemed to kind of sum up all of that up, and the excitement over the coronation, which again, for many different reasons, absolutely eclipsed the excitement over the coming coronation. It really was such a focus of the world's attention. Some of it, too, I think you have to look at. The Queen was young. I mean, you can see over my shoulder here. No, other way. How young she was. So young. She was very beautiful. The pictures don't always do her justice, but she had that kind of a radiant beauty, and she was very tiny, and an impossibly glamorous figure at this point in her life, and there's just something about the coronation that seemed really made for Hollywood, I suppose, and all the ingredients are there. Right, medieval, not medieval. Well, a medieval, the medieval cathedral, the ancient jewels, the ceremony itself, everything, and people were really looking forward to that, to watching it, and then also in a way to participate in it, and that's where the procession comes in. And historically, there have always been processions associated with coronations. If you go back 1,000 years, the monarch has to get from wherever they are to the place where they'll be crowned. And whether it's on horseback, whether they're, in a litter being carried along, or whether, from the middle of the 18th century, the 1700s, there's this great, fantastically, what I think of to be honest, is quite a grotesque looking gold coach, which is loathed by everyone who has to ride in it. It's just unbelievably uncomfortable, and it's like being tossed around in a washing machine. Apparently, you just feel so just absolutely nauseating kind of movement, and but but the idea of the procession, it's very much present because that's a way of including as many people as possible in the spectacle, and the coronation has always been a public occasion in the sense, not open to the public, but in the sense that there's meant to be witnesses. It's not something that's held behind closed doors and no one is privy to. An example of something like that would be the election of a pope, where only the cardinals who are electing the pope are there in camera, and so nobody really knows what happens, except at the end, a little puff of different colored smoke comes out of the chimney, and everyone says, "Oh, there's a pope," and maybe you see he comes out on the balcony. And in some ways, that's one of the few kind of well-known ceremonies of global significance that is close to being as old as the coronation, that still continues today. But with the coronation, what's different is that it's public, so we can watch it. There are always meant to be spectators, although, of course, society being kind of as classist as it is, the spectators typically were just the good and the great, as it were. But the procession is meant to be something we watch. And so that's where the idea for the book began, with the idea that there was a procession. It would pass by a place where my characters were living, and it would affect them. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, the coronation, like you said, it's royally adjacent. So there's stuff about the coronation, but it really focuses so much on the three main characters. And for me, like, there's all the glamour of the coronation, then there's the everyday lives that they're in. And there's just so much kindness. I mean, as much as they go through troubles, like with Stella, the way that Kaz and his wife welcome her, and the way that Edie treats everybody, even though, we're all like, she has the patience of Job with the two sisters. Like, you just know, right? Like, there's just so much kindness.
I think there's a lot of my mom and Edie's character, to be honest. The way my late mother was very patient with people, especially with whiny teenagers, of whom I was my sister was a much easier kid than I was. I wanted a book that, because a lot. I wrote this during COVID, and a lot of the news was focused on very. Again, I'm not the person who wants to say, again, like Candide, that everything's going to be fine. It's all fine. Everything's good. But I also wanted something to acknowledge that there are good people in this world. There are good people who work for the betterment of others, quite often at a cost to themselves, who are unselfish and giving and loving, and that can certainly be can revolve around these characters and still have a feeling of urgency, that it's not just going to be a cozy little everyone sitting around drinking cups. Although there's plenty of people sitting around drinking cups of tea, that I feel as if, my previous book was set in Italy. There was no tea. There are moments where I think, I feel like I need a little moment of repose, but nobody's drinking tea. How do I get them to sit down and just
dinners? They had a lot of dinners.
Yeah.
Maybe occasional little shot of grappa, but
So here's the fun part, because I did come up with some fun questions to wind up. So number one is, and we will all answer these. So number one is, how do you take your tea?
My late grandma would probably object to this, because she would have builder's tea that was basically tea. But I like a really strong tea. But then I add in quite a lot of milk. And sugar is only if I'm feeling kind of under the weather, and I feel like I just need that little boost of energy. Yeah.
Okay. What about you, Barb?
Tea. It's a strong tea with a splash of milk. Lemon is for iced tea.
Um,
I will do it. I mean, I've done it, but
Yeah.
my grandmother was from England, and yeah, that was considered. You just didn't do tea, lemon. with
Yeah,
tea.
I've never known anyone from England who put popped lemon in their tea, to be honest.
No. I'm also a strong tea with just a splash of milk. And my tea this evening was Fortnum & Mason's Jubilee blend, because I ran out of my Royal blend that I know you had earlier. And my teacup actually was a gift from Sue from the Dartmouth Book Exchange that she gave me the last time we were at book club. So I have had
I
my
do have some
Royal.
Fortnum & Mason tea sitting in this room that I'm planning to give away to a reader at some point. We just have to get organized to do that.
Ooh.
I was trying to get someone to get me some coronation tea because they're going over for the coronation.
Yeah.
And the irony of this is I'm a daughter of the American Revolution, and so is she. So she's going over because she can't wait to go to the coronation because we're daughters of the American Revolution. But I was like, can you bring me back some tea?
Okay, so question number 2, and this is a polarizing question.
Mm-hmm.
When you have your scones, do you put jam and clotted cream on the top, or clotted cream and then jam?
So
People have
I'm
strong feelings about this.
I have. It's so funny because I like fruit, I like sugar. I have an aversion to jam, and it comes from, we lived in England when my dad had a sabbatical year, actually Jubilee year, 1976, 1977. And we lived there for, while he was on sabbatical. And I went to school in England, and and I don't have a ton of food aversions left, but every food aversion I've ever had stems from being forced to eat food at the school. And one of the things they would do is make you eat jam on things, and I would like choke on it. So I am the weirdo who I just put the clotted cream. If there's lemon curd, I love lemon curd.
I would take lemon curd. I love
almost
lemon
a
curd.
different lemon jam, really. But at any rate, I'll do that. And I can't.
Okay, so if you were to have lemon curd, would you put it above or below the clotted cream?
I would put it on the bottom and then the cream on top, and then sandwich it together.
Fair enough. Barb?
Yeah.
Neither. I'm sorry. The place where I get my scones, it's like a lemon blueberry scone. I'm not going to spoil the flavor of lemon blueberry scone.
Okay, but if you were to go to an English tea.
Okay, I've been many years ago. I've been to an English tea. I put just the clotted cream.
Yeah. I don't love, like, I won't always necessarily put the clotted cream. Like my sugar crusted scones, and if people want to go to my website, it's there along with the kind of book club extra.
I'm a huge jam girl.
I would say that recipe because I love scones. So.
I'm a huge jam girl.
Make them for coronation morning.
Yeah.
I'll make the dough the night before, and then I'll bake them up at 4 a.m.
Ooh. No, I'm a huge jam girl, and I make my own jam, and I usually have 3 or 4 kinds at any given time. And here's the funny thing: I don't actually eat a lot of toast, but I love jam, so I always have it so that when I want it, and then of course I end up giving a bunch of it to my kids.
Yeah, because how many jars of it can you eat?
Right, it goes in like a Christmas basket or whatever. But I make like raspberry and strawberry and hascap, and we make apple pie jam, but I would put jam on the bottom and then the clotted cream, and light on the clotted cream but heavier on the jam.
Yeah. Well, during COVID, like I went on a jam making kick with some of my friends, and we had just jars and jars of it. My husband loves jam, but there's only so much he could eat, and I ended up giving most of it away to friends.
I was going to say, did you watch the Friends episode where Monica was making all the jam? Yeah. Okay, so that being said about scones and jam, because I know, like, I went to one of HarperCollins's teas back in the fall, and then you just did 2 of them, and so when they come out and they place those lovely trays in front of you, and there's usually like sweets on one and savory on the other. Yeah. Which one do you want to grab first? The sweet?
Oh, I do the savory. I work through it. It's because that to me feels like the main course.
Right.
And then so there's the sandwich. So usually it's the sandwiches and sometimes they're little pinwheel sandwiches. And so the one we were at, I was at the Fairmont Hotel Vancouver on Sunday
Right.
with Sarah Penner and Jeannie Chang and Robin Yateman, and the food was spectacular. And we actually, sometimes it kind of ends up so you're so busy signing and talking that you don't have time to eat the tea. I think this is maybe the fourth or fifth tea I've done, and but no, this was like we had time, and Sarah and I fell on our tray like we were wolves, and it disappeared, and so good. So yeah, I remember there's sandwiches on the very bottom that we just hoovered through, and there was, there's an open face smoked salmon one. It was so yummy.
Yes.
And then there was a middle tray that had the scones, and they had a cheese scone, and then just a plain buttermilk. So neither had raisins. I was in heaven. And then the top had just, I mean, it looked like it came out of a French patisserie. It was just so delicious. And I can't even remember all. And there was one like a petit bowl of chocolate and little lemon meringue scone or lemon meringue.
Yep. I did that tea in November. It was at the Fairmont in Vancouver, and it was so good.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it probably would be a very similar menu. It was really, really yummy.
Ask Janie; she was at both.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, because Kate and then Kate was our lovely friend, girlfriend Kate Quinn had COVID, so couldn't go. Right. But there's rumors, nothing's confirmed yet, that there will be another tea. Either in Vancouver or in Toronto this fall, and that because Kate and Janie have another book coming out called The Phoenix Crown, and I might be lucky enough to join them. I would presume as moderator, because we'll be finished talking about my book at that stage. And I have absolutely no problem with that, because it's just a yummy day out, and I get to and then I get to spend time with my friends.
Yeah. And then I was going to ask you one more thing. Oh, and Barb had a few ideas with this one too. So,
okay. Oh yeah.
I said, because I put up my review today, and at the end I said that like this reminded me of all my favorite period dramas, like kind of put together. So it was like The Paradise, which had the hotel, but then Downton Abbey, which had like the really adorable like staff members, and then Grantchester with the mystery, and what was the other one? Oh, and then Call the Midwife, just because you just love all of those girls, And I'm like, it's like taking all of those like warm feelings you get from those and putting it into one. And so like somebody should it should be a masterpiece thing. They should either do it as a movie or a 3-parter. But then I was like, so who would we cast as me and Stella and Edie?
I keep getting asked that. And interestingly, with my earlier books, I would always cast them just for myself. I wouldn't necessarily tell anyone, because I needed to picture what the people look like. And with the last few books, I just have them in my head, and they don't really correspond with any particular actor. I feel as if Jamie, if he were to walk into the room, I'd know him. I can't draw, so I can't draw a picture of him. But I just imagine, as he's been described, kind of tall and kind of lanky guy, and with beautiful, black, glossy black hair, and beautiful brown eyes. At one point, Edie's looking at his eyes, and she realizes that she describes them as looking like tortoiseshell. And yeah, Jamie was so fun to write.
That's lovely. I said Dev Patel was who came to mind.
Yeah. Actually,
I would have done Theo James.
Oh yeah, there. And you know what? It's interesting. I didn't cast it in terms of actors, but when they were casting the audiobook, it's a multicast audiobook, and the people at Harper Audio are always kind enough to kind of let me have some input, and so they'll send me a selection of narrators and then invite me to choose, and so far they've always gone along with the people I like, and so the guy who plays Jamie is Vidish Athavale, and then it's Karen Cass plays Edie, and then Susan I'm just blanking on Susan's name. I'm sorry, Susan, because you were terrific. And Susan's been, no, I've just lost it. I'll remember it 10 minutes from now, her last name. And they all, they're all well-known actors to begin with, who've, they've won awards for their narration. And I remember I loved Vidish's voice. He just has that just plummy English accent that's so amazing. But Jamie's a Scot, and I was confident that he could do a Scottish accent properly. Of course he could, but I had a very specific Scottish accent in mind. I spend a lot of time in Scotland because my daughter does the Highland dancing. And so we're over there pretty much every summer now, so she can compete in the big games and so on. And, a Scottish accent is no more a kind of a homogenous thing you can't, an English accent, they differ quite a lot. And Jamie, when I was writing the book, had a very specific accent that was the same accent I have relatives who live in Edinburgh, and you'd call it a Morningside accent, which it's kind of, what you'd expect somebody from, an educated background to have, upper middle class kind of, somebody who'd been to university. And it almost sounds English at times. It's almost like an English accent overlaid with a bit of a burr. And so I sent back an email to HarperCollins saying, I think Vidish is amazing. Could we find out whether he'd be comfortable doing a Morningside accent for Jamie? And then they sent back a little reel of him doing it. I thought, yes, that's just perfect. It's just perfect. So yeah, it's I've been listening to the audiobook whenever I have a few moments in the car, and just kind of sinking in and really enjoying. It's fun when somebody else takes, so these are my words originally, but then they're interpreting them and kind of adapting, my words into these performances. I find it amazing to hear what other people are doing with it, if that makes any sense. And it's so entertaining to listen to. I'm getting close to the end, and I'm just like, oh, I only have 2 hours left. Oh my gosh.
Barb.
Yes.
We have a number of comments over in the sidebar.
Oh,
What would you like?
I've been neglecting.
Well,
Carrie Mulligan, yes, I think that would be a very good idea.
Oh, Carrie Mulligan would be a great one.
I agree.
And I said Rose Williams for Stella, just because I just finished watching Sanditon.
Yeah.
And someone would like to know what you're working on now, by the way.
Yeah. So it's still in the early stages, just because I've kind of been, again, the Coronation being a month after the book comes out is awesome. And it's also, it's been pretty intense really since January, to be honest.
You're working on interviews and sleep, right?
Interviews, sleep is kind of a side project at this stage. I'm I'm probably imbibing a little more caffeine than I normally would. So this book, the next book, it's once again set in Britain. That's my comfort zone. It's although I will say, and people often ask me, why don't I write about Canadian history? I find Canadian history fascinating too. I study, or I write about British history because that's what I studied, and that's what I have a facility in researching, and in terms of just what I can kind of pull out of my brain without having to work as hard, to be honest. And I do want to write books that are set in Canada in the future. I just feel I'm going to need I'll need like an extra year to work on the first time I attempt it, just to get back into, here are the sources, here are the resources, this is where I go. And in the meantime, I just invite people who are interested in, Canadian historical fiction. I can reel off a number of amazing writers. I mean, Genevieve Graham, I think, being in some ways the preeminent person who's writing about Canadian history. I mean, if you want a really, not only well-written, but kind of deliciously satisfying work of historical fiction set in or focusing on Canadian themes, I would say it's Jen Graham. But
John
that, sorry.
Donna Allward.
I have the manuscript, and again, I'm just waiting until like I'm not actually. I was
So you can
trying
breathe?
not your book. I was trying to read something that was actually for work, like for purposes of my work. And the other night, and I fell asleep like this, and woke up
I
about
feel
4
that.
a.m.
I feel that.
What is this? I had my face was lying on the book.
Oh,
So this book, it rather than having the really tightly focused timeline like I have in Coronation Year, it takes in most of the 20th century, and without giving too much away, there are elements of Roman Holiday, which is possibly one of my favorite films, and also kind of a Prince and the Pauper theme, and that's all I'm going to say for now. But it's coming along. It's actually, I'm enjoying when I actually have the moments to work on it. I'm really enjoying it.
that sounds lovely.
Yeah.
So we did have a couple of comments too. So, and we only see them when they pop up. They just say Facebook user. So I apologize for not using people's name. But someone says that her nurse Marilyn is reading Coronation Year and she's loving it. And she informed me that the gown is an amazing read, and I would second that. Someone said, I finished reading Coronation Year last week and I loved it. The characters and the ending are perfect. People can't wait to read the book. Have you thought of writing a historical fiction book showing the parallel between the two coronations, maybe a dual timeline with someone
like the modern day one?
Attended both.
You know, it's
a cool idea.
Yeah, I feel like I need some perspective on it. Interestingly, one of the really great questions I got, I can't even remember which event it was at in the last few days, but I think it was probably in Vancouver. And someone said, if we were to go jump ahead 70 years, and I were by some miracle to still be with us, cryogenically frozen or something, jump ahead 70 years and go back and write about this coronation as historical fiction, what would I focus on?
Yeah.
And that was it's a tricky way that talk about, thinking on my feet. But I think what would be interesting is that I think it would be how did people find meaning in this coronation at a time that actually is less hopeful than 1953, where people are extremely anxious about many things, legitimately so, right? And it's not just, it's the environment, it's, kind of COVID and its specter. It's, the economy in Britain, which is in absolute tatters at the moment. The ongoing Brexit crisis. I mean, you name it. And so I think it would be challenging to write that story, because then I would want to find the hope amid the darkness, right? That one kind of candle in the darkness. And I'm sure it's possible, right? But I don't have the distance from it. I think that's one of the reasons I love writing historical fiction, is I can stand back and assess things with a little bit of hindsight.
And context, right? You can put it in context of what came
and
what came before. And
not to say that as an historian, historians, we're notorious at getting things wrong and making blanket judgments that are incorrect. And that's why, you have this subspecialty academically of historiography, which is assessing how past generations of historians, what their take was on things. But broadly speaking, I think, it's always a useful, even if you're getting it wrong in the end, it's a useful exercise to kind of for us to look back and see where we came from, and what has made us the people we are today. That's what kind of keeps me going as an historian and as a writer.
Yeah. Well, we are closing in on an hour. Can you believe it?
I know. I warned you. Also difficulties on my end, but I do. I'm a long question answer.
Close it up by telling you there are many requests for you to come back to Vancouver.
I would love, my family is from Vancouver. My mom grew up in West Vancouver and my dad in West Point Grey. And I have family, kind of both all scattered all over the city. And in fact, I didn't even get to see all of my cousins. I was just on such a tight schedule. And so I would love to go. Any excuse to go back to BC, I will.
I'm still hoping to make it to Toronto to see you.
Yeah, I know. Well, and I think there might even be like a tea in Toronto, but I'm also going to be out I'm going to be out in Nova Scotia this summer in July. So I keep thinking, maybe I can get one of the local booksellers. Summers are tricky for events because everybody is busy with vacation and holidays, and maybe even if I just get in somewhere to sign some books, that might be fun. I'm
going to kidnap you for lunch for sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I can drag you along to see some. My daughter's competing in the Canadian Championships, and so maybe I'll drag you along. You can get your fill of bagpipes.
I love bagpipes, so that's not a hardship for me.
They're nice. There are days when I fall asleep and feel as if I can hear them echoing in my head. Can I just? This is such an aside, but it's kind of exciting because the day before the Coronation Year came out, I woke up to an email from Scotland saying that my daughter has been invited to dance at now I'm just blanking on it, the Braemar Gathering, which is the big Highland Games near Balmoral, which the Queen would famously attend each year. The pictures of her with a little blanket over her lap, watching the girls dance. And so this September, my daughter will be one of those girls dancing for the King and Queen, which is very exciting.
Cool. That's exciting.
It's very cool.
So we will be in Scotland for most of August. First they'll be at the Commonwealth. There's the Commonwealth Championships, and then the World Championships, and then Braemar. I'm not sure which one I'm more excited about, to be honest. So we'll get to see the King at a distance where there's no.
Sure.
It's still kind of cool to see you perform the King.
It is, yeah. And since my Scottish granny is no longer with us, but I feel she would approve. Apart from the expense,
right?
She'd be like, "It's cost a lot of money to make those trips." So I hope Grandma.
The things we do for our kids. So
right.
One last question. Someone wants to know if there's going to be any teas scheduled in Ottawa.
I know. I have been asking about that, and maybe I'll just maybe I have to move from asking to begging, because I would say it's dozens of people asking about it. And I've friends and family in Ottawa. So maybe the key thing is to find other HarperCollins authors who have, there's some logistical issues, right? To find 2 other authors who have books coming out and make sure it fits in with their touring schedules. And then, is there a room free at one of the nice hotels? And, but maybe I'll just delicately ask my lovely publicity team if there's something maybe we could do. Because the one I did with Kate Quinn, I guess this would be the fall of 2019.
Yeah.
It was so much fun. We had the best time. It was such
the video you did of that was awesome.
Oh, it was just, I'll do, but I would go sit in the foyer of the Canadian Tire with Kate Quinn and talk. She's just a wonderful writer, and she's a wonderful friend.
And the last comment is Sue Slade said, if you are in Halifax, you are welcome to visit the Dartmouth Book Exchange anytime.
I would love to do that. And we're there for almost a week while my daughter's competing, and then my friends, my family, a big chunk of family who live in Bedford. So we'll be back and forth all over the city that week.
Well, this has been super fun.
Well, thank you.
It really has. I'm so glad you came on.
Yeah, this has been. You had a lot of information to share, which was good.
And it feels like we just kind of scratched the surface, but like we went the whole, like you could just come and do a whole weekend.
Well, with Jennifer.
What'll be interesting is if people are watching, people are deciding to watch the coronation, I'm not going to do some kind of like live commenting or anything, but I'll be posting throughout the day. And if people have questions for me, I'll be trying. I'll leave out. I'll kind of put up a post and invite people to ask questions. Do my best to answer them if they have questions about like the history nerd stuff that I might be able to answer. I'm less well versed in terms of who's wearing what, unless that what happens to be a 17th century crown, in which case I can help you with that.
Right. I have to say before we go, that your newsletters for the past 3 or 4 months, every time you send one, you focus on a different part. So it could be the procession, it could be the ceremony, it could be like the number of crowns or what they wear. Anyway, you focused on a different one each time, and it was so rich in information. I thought, oh my God, that's like there's so much.
Yeah. And I even then feel I just scratched the surface. And if people didn't get the newsletters, all the same information is there if you scroll back on my Facebook page and also on my Instagram feed.
But just the thoughts and so on. We'll recommend you subscribe, and we'll put the links in the show notes anyway.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Barb, what's coming up next week, Barb?
We're back next week. We're going to be talking about Susan Meisner's new book, Only the Beautiful. So we're going to go from the coronation to the Dust Bowl. But I love Susan's book.
I think the world of her, and you know, she's such a tremendously talented writer.
She is.
And just run out and grab that book. Yeah, just go right ahead. It's wonderful.
The Nature of Fragile Things, and when we get to the halfway point, right before the earthquake, and like my jaw dropped. Because she threw in that.
Okay, so this is where I'm going to confess. This will be my first Susan Meisner book.
Very good. You're going to like it.
And you know, she's one of these. You know, to be honest, my overwhelming experience with historical fiction writers, of whom I have just a lot of friends who write in the genre, it's a very welcoming, warm, embracing group of people, almost all of them women, to be honest, although there's some great guys writing historical fiction, but for the most part, the writers I know are women. And I just, you know, people will say, oh, I'm so surprised you actually know these people and are friends with them. I'm like, well, you know, it's much better to be friends. But they're a great group of women. And Janie Chang, let me just say, Janie is one of my favorite people in the entire world. And, you know, I would go, again, going out to Vancouver, you know, I love the events, but I'm really excited to get to spend, I got to spend some more time with her, and that's always a joy. So, and her newest book, The Moon, is just tremendous.
It was beautiful.
It blew my mind as somebody who I thought I had a pretty good overall knowledge of the Great War, and here she told a story that I was only dimly aware of.
Yeah.
And hats off to her.
Her voice is just beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we are going to sign off for tonight. I'm so sorry about that, because like I said, we could just go on forever and ever and ever. So
chatterbox.
No, it's all good. We will once we post this, if there are questions in there, feel free to pop back in and answer some questions or whatever. But just thanks so much for joining us tonight. Like, it was such an honor, because I just fangirl.
And we love the book so much. It really it fell in between the series, these really heavy topics, and to read something warm and uplifting was just it was perfect.
Yeah, that's what I was aiming for. So I'm very glad you received it that way, because you know, I wanted something that would make people that would encourage a spirit of hope. I wrote it during COVID. I needed that for myself. Yeah.
Well, you succeeded, because it was very hopeful. It was very kind. It was very loving and healing. And it was just a lovely, lovely read.
Can't recommend it enough.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies.
All right. Well, thanks for coming.
Get some sleep.
All right.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.